Well, um, got my supper into me. I've got the kettle on the stove now. I got a good fire in the stove right now, so I'm hoping that I can boil my water that way. I have a feeling I'm going to have to turn to the propane stove though, because you know, it's getting late and I'm tired and I'm cold and I'm ready to pack it in. Even with the heater on in here, it's pretty cold. I can see my breath. And so it's taking the edge off, but that's about it. So, I may have to go to the propane stove anyway soon. Uh, it's funny, I was thinking today about a conversation I had with a friend of mine uh, a few months back now. And this is a lady who was born in 1988. So I was 20 when she was born. So she doesn't remember the era I grew up in. She wasn't even thought of in that era, you know. And of course, I was born in '68. So I grew up, I was born in the late 60s. I grew up through the 70s. I was a teenager in the 80s, was a young man in the late 80s and early 90s, and so on. And, I've seen a lot of changes. I've seen the world change quite a bit. And she said something to me, and it's funny because it's a thought that I had had at times, but I had never really said it. It was just something that I had thought. And we were talking about something from back when I was a kid. And she says, yeah, it was a television program or something. Can't remember now, or a song maybe. I can't remember. But she says, yeah, I always found that era really creepy. There's just something about it, she said. It had a creepy vibe to it. Like when I see old movies and TV shows and pictures and things, there's just something kind of creepy about that whole era. That 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s era. And the funny thing is, I had always thought that too. And I mean, I lived in it. I caught the tail end of it. And I always thought that too. And, over the years thinking about it, what I noticed is, and I don't know if there's a significance here or not to certain years, but what I noticed is that the old world that had existed for about 30 years after World War II, there was a period of about 30 years where there was hardly any change. And technologically and socially and whatnot, there was change, but it wasn't, we didn't see a lot of change. The pace of change was very slow. And that period of time went from 1946 to 1976. And what I noticed, and this is just my personal observation, is that from 1977 on, the pace of change seemed to speed up. And it still wasn't like it is now, but it was noticeably faster from 77 on. And, like I say, I caught the tail end of that old era, though. So in many ways, I grew up in what you'd call the old days, I guess, the old times or whatever. At least until I was 8 or 9 years old, I did. And I have a lot of memories. I remember stuff going back to when I was even a baby. So, I was a year old when they landed on the moon, or at least when they said they did. I always wonder about those things. But, um, I remember that day. I have memories of my mother carrying me around and stuff in her arms when I was a baby. I remember laying in a car bed on the floor of my dad's car. My dad had a 1957 Chev. And I remember looking up through the curved windshield and seeing the street lights, how at night, how the distortion of them when they'd hit that curve in the windshield and stuff, And, looking up through the windshield, I remember the heater blowing on my head. And I was annoyed because I was uncomfortable because it was hot. I remember that being overheated from the car heater because they had me in the car bed on the floor there at my mother's feet, And the heater blower was blowing hot air right on me, onto my head, and I didn't like it. But anyway, bottom line is this. what I think, and this is just a theory that I have, and this doesn't come from anywhere but in my head, so take it for what it's worth. I mean, consider the source, as they say, but I have this theory that there was so much evil unleashed during World War II. Because if you look at the scale of the evil that happened at that time with the concentration camps and the mass extermination and all the rest of it that went on, and the millions and millions of people who were murdered, and the millions of people who died horrible deaths, over in the war, and everything, all those soldiers that went over there and never came back, and all the heartache from their families. I had a great aunt, and the love of her life went over there, and he never came back. He was killed over there, and she was never the same. She never got involved with a man again, and she died an old spinster. Her heart was that badly broken. And there are so many stories like that, And I think that that kind of negative energy, that kind of evil takes a toll. And just like when we get injured, we have to recover. If you break your leg, you're not going to be out dancing the next day. You're going to have to recover from that. And I think that that's true with the spiritual side of things too, with us individually and with us collectively. When we suffer a spiritual injury, either as an individual or collectively, that stays with us. And I think a lot of the creepiness of that era comes from that, because there was just a residue of evil still hanging in the air. And now don't get me wrong, I have a lot of fond memories of that era. That was when I was a little kid and stuff, and there's a lot of things I miss about that era. But it did have kind of a creepy vibe to it. Anyway, that one friend of mine did say that, and she wasn't even alive then. She just picked that up from old TV programs and stuff. And I thought to myself, I've always thought that. And, anyway, but I think that's the reason. I think so much evil got unleashed upon the world. And there was such an injury there, that we were still recovering. And that's the reason that things were the way they were. That's why things seemed the way they did. Anyway, here's Rocky. I don't know if you can see him. I hope you can. He's having a nice sleep. He's had his chicken dinner there, his Friskies chicken dinner. So he's all full of chicken dinner and happy. Doesn't take much to make my Rocky happy. He's a pretty simple fella. But he's smart as a whip, too, I'll tell you. And he's a character, I'll tell you, and he has a lot of positive energy about him. I think that's why a lot of you, when you watch these videos, you gravitate so much towards Rocky. Because he just radiates something. And I can't quite explain it, but it's there. I feel it. And even you guys feel it, I know, when you watch these videos. And like I say, I think the events of World War II unleashed something upon our planet and upon us collectively. And even people like me that weren't alive during the war were still impacted by it in a way, because we were alive during the healing process, And of course now, what do they want to do? They want to do it all again. The descendants of the people that unleashed all that on us in the first place, they want to do it all again. They want to get the eugenics going, the euthanasia. They want to get another world war started. They want to put us into a depression. They want to bring us to our knees, And if we've learned anything, we can't let them do it. If there's any way we can stop them, we have to. It's a desperate situation, really. And it won't just affect us, it'll affect generations after us if we allow this to happen, And anyway, like I say, there was definitely a creepy vibe back years ago, and I did pick up on it, and I knew right away when my friend said that what she was talking about. And even though I do remember that era fondly in many ways, that was my first exposure to the world. That's the era where I learned about the world, really. And so, for me, I have some fond memories of it, but yes, there was something a little off for sure, and I honestly do think that was it. I think that all that evil that was unleashed, I think we were still dealing with that. We were still cleansing it, I suppose. We were still scrubbing the crap off the walls, you could say, from this incident that had happened, 20, 30 years earlier. Anyway, that's just a kind of a side note from me, I guess, or whatever. I don't know, a little interlude of something. I don't know what it is, but I am curious to know if anybody else ever had that feeling, especially those who were alive in that era after the war and are now in their 50s and 60s and 70s. Excuse me. Oh, dinner is not dinner is rebelling against me, I guess, right now. Anyway, oh my goodness. Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. I might sound a little nutty. But I don't know. It's just a feeling I've always had, and I haven't heard very many people talk about it. But when that friend of mine talked about it a while back, it did bring it to mind anyway, and it is something that I could relate to because I had felt that way. And this is somebody who didn't even live then, that was just picking up on something from watching old TV shows and listening to old music and stuff, Anyway, enough of that. I gotta go out and check my fire. The work here is never really done, It isn't really. It keeps me on my toes. Yeah. Anyway, I gotta go check my fire. Hope you're all having a wonderful evening, and I'll talk to you later.